At nearby Charles University, this professor is not a part of the zombie festivities. However, he believes his mind is not his own, and that his personality has been altered, his brain manipulated by Toxoplasma, the same parasite that controls rats. 20 years ago, evolutionary biologist Jaroslav Fleger was tested for Toxoplasma. He gave a blood sample and waited for his results.
Within 2 days I realized that I am Toxoplasma infected. So it was interesting. I was not very happy about this. But in the same time I realized that my Toxoplasma positivity could explain some interesting, some interesting traits in my own behavior. Because I am usually not too much afraid in situations when I should be afraid. For example, on some field expedition in Turkey, in eastern Turkey, there was some gunfire, a lot of gunfire there in the night. And everybody else were afraid, not me. I was quite quiet.
Toxoplasmosis in humans is incredibly common. 1/3 to 1/2 of all adults are infected. We get it from undercooked meat and from kitty litter boxes. Professor Fleger was curious. Could Toxoplasma be influencing the personalities of other people too? So he gathered his students, both infected and uninfected, and got them to complete standard personality tests. The results were striking.
Toxoplasma infected men have different properties, psychological properties, than uninfected men, and also infected women have also different personality profile than uninfected women.
Not only that, Professor Fleger discovered that infected individuals have slower reflexes and got in 2.5 times more traffic accidents. At first, Fleger's controversial results were dismissed by the scientific community. It had always been accepted that Toxoplasma was mostly a benign parasite. But back in California, Professor Kevin Lafferty had a very different reaction. Lafferty understood the power of brain-snatching parasites, and so he jumped right into Fleger's research.
One of the most interesting things about his results is that men and women tend to respond differently to infection. For instance, men seem to have a lower IQ if they're infected, and women have the opposite, a higher IQ if they're infected. And so, if it says anything, perhaps it indicates that men and women's brains react differently to a particular type of neuromodulation by this parasite.
And this all makes perfect sense to Lafferty.
Well, we've got this parasite that manipulates mouse behavior to get the mouse into a cat, but that same parasite ends up in our brains. It's in our brains. It doesn't know that it's not in a mouse, but it tries hard to do the same thing that it would do to a mouse, and therefore it ends up manipulating our behavior.
Professor Lafferty wondered if Toxoplasma is affecting so many individuals, what might this mean for their societies? He focused on correlating 2 separate pools of information. Countries all over the world keep medical records of Toxoplasma infection rates among pregnant women, since infection can be extremely dangerous to a developing fetus. Dr. Lafferty then cross-referenced this with national personality profiles across different countries.
We see that populations that have high levels of Toxoplasma tend to be, on average, more neurotic than populations that have low levels of Toxoplasma. And a good example is risk aversion. So more neurotic cultures tend to be less risk averse. They establish stronger governments, more authoritarian governments, things like that.
It's hard to believe that a single-celled microorganism might be shaping not only an individual's personality, but entire societies.
There's obviously lots of things that affect culture, history, and geography. When we do the analysis that looks at how much Toxoplasma explains, it amounts to about 30%. That's a lot of the variation that's explainable by a biological phenomenon like this parasite Toxoplasma.
This radical theory suggests that a parasite is defining who we are individually and culturally. And there may not be much we can do about it.
After I published the work on Toxoplasma, I decided to get tested out of curiosity. I was not infected, it turns out, even though I had cats as pets growing up. But if you did find out that you were infected, it raises an interesting question, which is, now you found out that you're sharing your personality with a parasite. Is that something you'd want to change? Are you happy with your shared personality, or would you want your old personality back? It's sort of a hypothetical because we can't really treat infections with Toxoplasma, but I think it opens up this broader question of, as hosts, in many cases, we're sharing our personality with parasites. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or can we just live with it?
If literally billions of us may be infected with mind-altering parasites, is there anything we can learn from our brain snatchers? Dalhousie University's Dr. Shelley Adamo thinks there is.
Parasites are really nature's neurobiologists, and we're running out of drugs in the pipeline to treat, say, mental disorders like depression. And so it's probably time to start looking outside the box, as they say, into different places where we might be able to find chemicals that have activity on the brain. And one place to look would be parasites that are able to secrete such things. So I don't think as humans we should be too proud to look to parasites for some instruction.
As it turns out, the mind-manipulating zombie apocalypse doesn't really look like this. Much more like this, at least for now. We like to believe we're in control, but if what we're discovering about the rest of the animal kingdom is anything to go by, who's really in control is a lot more complicated and interesting than we ever imagined.